Hello everyone and welcome to OTT Question Time. My name is Koza Kanji and I run for Professional. This week we are talking about, we're introducing OTT analytics and joining me on the panel to discuss this are, in the order that I can see them, Marty, if you could kick us off please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Marty Roberts. I'm the CEO of a company called Wicket Labs. We have an audience insights platform. And so what we do is aggregate data from lots of different types of technology systems that our customers employ. And then we provide analytics for actually 2,000 different video services that are out there. So we have a pretty good perspective on what's happening in the OTT space around video analytics and how people are using those analytics as part of their everyday actions in their business, marketing, content licensing decisions, et cetera.
Thanks, Marty, and that explains succinctly why you're on the panel. Yeah, as well. Bhavesh.
Yeah, hi guys. So my name is Bhavesh Vaghela. I'm the CEO of a company called Singula Decisions. Similar to Marty, I've been in the pay TV industry for some time. Over the last 22 years, the business has been going, and our entire focus is on subscriber growth. In the early days, it was very much around operationally, how we help customers manage their subscribers on their behalf. And in the second half of our lifetime, it's more about using analytics and insights to really drive what we say is the right next best action. So and we help a lot of operators kind of engage with their subscribers through their customer journey. So hopefully that's probably one of the reasons why I've been invited on this panel.
Indeed, yeah, thank you, Bhavesh. And Julie.
Hi everyone, so I'm Julie Lefevre. I've spent 15 years working in the TV industry, especially in the research and business intelligence field for ViacomCBS and Discovery. So I know more or less data analysis, actually, to find actionable insights and help business grow. So I recently launched GL Insights, and basically it's consultancy covering insights and analytics solutions for media and startup. And actually, I have to say this year I was really focusing on content intelligence. So I think, and I'm very interested in the OTT challenges as well.
Thank you very much, Julie, and we are definitely going to come to talking about OTT analytics and content as well. Given that this is an intro to OTT analytics, I got to tell you that my own intro to it was when I was working at Virgin Media 10 years ago, and we used to have a guy, a really smart bloke who used to join the sort of heads of department meeting and bring a printout and show us the dashboard every couple of weeks, and that was the first time I'd really heard about OTT analytics. I knew about Google Analytics at that point. Marty, can you tell us about the approaches to analytics? So let's start from the most sort of basic. Am I right in thinking that at its most simple version, it is really plugging in log files from apps and from websites into something like Google Analytics?
Yeah, actually, especially as an introduction, definitely you can collect data from log files. But what we find most people doing, and what we advise most people do, is start very simply. Google Analytics has a couple lines of code that you drop into your sites and apps, and they do all the data collection for you. They store that. They can process it back into a cloud-based database like their Google BigQuery. And our advice to people is, that's a very simple step, but also to focus on a couple of the details around what you're collecting about those users. So making sure that you tag out that you have an individual ID for each user. That can still be an anonymous ID that Google just assigns to that user, but then you can track between sessions. So you can see if they come back, watch more content over time. You need to include your video ID, your content title, and then some events around the playback itself, start, stops, duration, percentage duration. Start very simply, but with that kind of baseline data, then you can actually do all kinds of really interesting things on top of it, and to really understand what's working well in terms of pulling people into your service, what's working well for engaging them, what's helping win back customers that might have drifted away from the service. Yeah. So, our advice is start simply, use something like a Google Analytics. There's other good tools that are in the marketplace as well that do more sophisticated things. But for most of our customers, you can get all the data you really need with a really cheap tool, which is just Google Analytics.
Okay, so that's data from web services, right? What about, Bhavesh, what about from apps and from smart TVs and from other devices?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Marty's very right in the sense that, getting the data from various sources. And the truth is, most sources where your customer will interact with your subscription service will be generating some level of data. The question then becomes, is the data relevant to what you're trying to do? So, if you talk to operators, a good few years ago, the idea was, I need to get all my data into one place, all of it. I just want to analyze it all, and then trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it. What we try and, similar to what Marty was suggesting, we try and help our clients think about what they want to use the data for in the first place. So what is the outcome they're looking for? If I'm looking to increase customer acquisition, and most of my my offering is digital, then maybe things like the web logs and those kind of things are going to be relevant in order to convert customers at the point of sign up. But if I'm looking at ARPU, or I'm looking at churn, we might be looking at different things like the app data, how people are actually consuming my content and how they're engaging. So the problem, the reality is the data is not the issue. There's buckets of it, there's loads of it, there's so much data out there.
Yeah.
It's about figuring out and doing it in small chunks, not trying to boil the ocean, really trying to figure out, what am I really trying to do? I'm trying to increase my conversions on my website. Okay, let's focus on that.
We're going to come to the applications for the data in a while. We've got quite a few bullet points to get through. Yeah, quite a few talking points to get through. I'm really just trying to sort of set the scene, to understand the lay of the land about where the data comes from in the first instance. Julie, at ViacomCBS, when you were working there at Discovery, it's not just about app data and about user data, is it? I mean, what other sort of data sources were what were you working with?
Well, especially because when you're working for national, I would say, linear channels or free-to-air or pay TV channels, you use data source. Basically, it's audience measurement, like Tech Edge. I use, on a daily basis. Actually, you can have the performance of the channels, but also, the program performances and so on. So it's more about that. But then, of course, you track other metrics like ARPU. That is really that's a very important one, or also churn rate. We can also get this information as a pay TV model.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So Marty, going back to the original question, then. So as you said, the most simple version is, a simple solution. Is get the data, plug it into something like Google Analytics. After that, what are the more sophisticated solutions? Am I at Virgin Media, for example? I'm pretty sure we were using Omniture. So is that the next sort of rung up from Google Analytics? And if so, what's after that? Is it using an OVP OTT analytics solution, and then is it like something using like your solutions or Conviva or Nice People at Work or Singula?
Right. So definitely, if collecting quality of service data is important to you, you can employ a service like a Conviva or a Nice People at Work, and they can kind of measure stream quality throughout the whole consumer experience. We found that most customers don't actually need that level of sophistication in their client side. And that includes apps and website. So, Google Analytics covers all that. So, but more importantly, as Bhavesh mentioned, it's now the real challenge is, how do I blend that data together with, if I'm a subscription video service, with my revenue and subscriber events? If I am, any of those video tracking services will tell you what title they watched, but not whether that was a movie or an episode or a class or whatever that was. And it's an episode, what series and what season. And so then you have to blend that data together with all the metadata that you have, either in a guide service or in your OVP. So it's your ability actually to take that raw data and start to string it together and harmonize it with the rest of your data sets that really start to provide really useful insights about your business. So you can make the whole goal is what actions are we taking with this data? And so working from those decisions and actions back really kind of simplifies the data collection and data harmonization process. You really know what you're looking for at that point.
And Bhavesh, is the difference here as well that the more simple the solution, like for example Google Analytics, the data's all there, but you as the customer have to tell Google Analytics what you want. In other words, you're extracting, you're not necessarily writing algorithms, but you're certainly writing queries or expressing queries that tell Google Analytics the important stuff that you want to look at. Whereas something more sophisticated might actually, do that work for you, anticipate what you're going to want as the customer, and give you that data proactively.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's pretty well documented kind of maturity curves on how you use data, and you've got from one level, which is exactly what you're describing, which is, I've got data in a simple repository, like a Google, and I'm trying to run dashboards and reporting off the back of it, and that is what you described as your experience when you were back in the day with Virgin. So you've got from there all the way through to, actually, I now want to predict behavior, which is different, right? I now want to, rather than just seeing a dashboard and a human making a decision based upon experience, I now want the system to help me predict what the likely behavior is of customers or the entities that you're trying to measure. And that requires a slightly different sophistication. And then you move on to being prescriptive, which is, actually, I'm predicting behavior, but I'm still, the human being is still managing and still engaging. And there is a time lag there, right? Because most people want to try and do things in real time. Prescriptive then moves into trying to do things in speed and start to use machine learning and those kind of things in order to try and engage with your customer in real time. So there's a spread there. Now, clearly, to get to the mature end of prescriptive, you kind of need to go through the steps along the way to get au fait with the data you've got and what you're trying to do. And systems get more and more sophisticated as you go up that chain. So there is, in all those scenarios, there is basic all the way through to more complex type of algorithms, models, depends what you want to call it. You help it make it easier for the user.
Julie, you and I were chatting about this earlier, about machine learning and about the difference between data sources is one part of analytics, and then the secondary part of analytics is the actual methodology, the analysis itself. Yeah,
exactly. So when we talk about big data, actually, big data is just a big amount of data that is large, is too complex that you cannot really process with traditional model. But combining big data with advanced analytics, like for instance, predictive analytics, which is actually predictive analytics use a statistical model and also a machine learning algorithm to actually learn from the past, but also find patterns, and find also a relationship between the variables to make predictions. So basically, you can actually identify, for instance, the people who can churn, who are most likely to churn in the next months, and having, I would say, more like a proactive, do an action, a marketing action, and so on to avoid, this churn rate. So actually, it's really, I would say, you can really have specific, analysis and being, I would say, more proactive in a way. So I think with the machine learning.
How important is the actual veracity of the data, the quality of the data? Because once you've actually got data, it goes through a bunch of processes, right? So actually, I can think of 4. So there's data gathering, data cleansing. What am I looking at? My notes. Data mining. Sorry.
Data storage.
And data storage. Well. Yeah. So Bhavesh, what about the first part of that? Well, no, we've already talked about the first part of that, which is the actual data gathering operation. Can you tell us what data cleansing is in this context?
Yeah, so I think, there is a lot of noise in data. And the question is, you used to get the adage, if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out, right? So, when you're talking about, although I think I remember them using a different word back in the day, but and that's how reports were built, right? It wasn't accurate. So there is a lot of noise around the data sets, certainly raw data files, raw data sets, to try and cleanse through, so it provides the right level of context that you're looking for. So cleansing is all about getting yourselves a clean set of data that can be used for analysis. And ironically, it's one of the biggest resource strains is getting the data together clean in a way that can be used. A data scientist probably spends 50, 60, 70% of his time just trying to engineer data before they even tackle the benefit of it. So it seems simple, but it is very onerous when each customer has slightly different nuances, and certain fields mean something slightly different, and it's trying to get your head around that in order to make it usable.
Julie, what's your experience? Oh, sorry, Marty, go on.
Actually, on that follow-on point, we spend a lot of time educating our customers about data fidelity and getting them comfortable with the fact that even though it feels digital and it should be 100%, there's no such thing as a clean 100% data set. But the decisions that they're making on this data, they're not going to make a different decision at 98, or 99.2% versus 99.8%, right? That level of what kind of marketing campaign are we going to run? How are we evaluating this content? Data loss just happens. It's just, or data drift. It just naturally kind of occurs in the processing and the transformation of that data. And as Bhavesh mentioned, 70% of that effort is just harmonizing that work, and it's unsung heroes work, but it actually doesn't really do anything for the business. It just sets it up until you visualize it, until you start making decisions based on it. That's when we actually start getting value from that work. But you can never discount kind of that unsung hero work of cleaning up that data set. But you also have to, especially for some executives, make them comfortable with the fact that they're not going to have a perfect data set here, but it's probably not going to change the decision they were going to make anyways.
Well, Marty, what's the difference between harmonizing and cleansing?
It's essentially the same thing. Harmonizing actually involves a step of typically stitching together multiple data sets. So my marketing system doesn't use the same ID as the subscriber system. So how do I identify it? How do I create a Rosetta Stone so I can really track that full customer journey? As I mentioned, my Google Analytics will tell me what video they watched, but not whether that was a show or a movie. So I need to stitch that together with its metadata. And so that harmonization effort is part of the transformation process and getting a clean data set so then we can work with it and make good decisions.
Julie, you worked a lot with linear, right?
Sorry?
You worked a lot with linear?
With Linear,
yeah.
Linear, but also, yes, I did also a project actually about with data warehouse and doing I would say it was like a single data platform, and we wanted to create a business portal. So we had to gather a lot of sources of information, a lot of sources of data, like for instance the YouTube analytics, some real batch for different sources. We spent a lot of time actually in terms of data cleansing, and also the project of taxonomy. So what is taxonomy? Actually, it's having the right classification of your titles, and it really takes time, especially when you work at ViacomCBS at a global level. We were counting in months for that, and then when it's fine, when you have the data ready, yes, you spend time, for instance, using Tableau and working, finding the right dashboards that can serve the different publics, like the different public, like the C audience levels or programming departments, marketing. So yes, it's a big process. It's a long process.
Yeah. Right. Look, thank you guys, because that was basically the end of section 1, which is, I know it's been kind of abstract, but I've been trying to sort of, as I say, do the intro part of analytics before we get into the slightly less abstract, which is when it comes to OTT metrics. Let's look at some real life examples. What in this context is ARPU, and then what is churn, and how does analytics help either of these things or both of these things? Bhavesh?
Well, that's a very good question, right? So when you'll be surprised when you go and talk to a customer and you've got various executives around the table, and you ask them, what does churn mean for you? You get a bunch of different answers. That's one of the things that it's about harmonizing that, trying to get a consistent view of churn. Is it annual churn? Is it monthly churn? What type of churn are you looking for? Ultimately, churn is about people who are leaving your service, and you're trying to keep them as long as you can, right? That's ultimately what they care about. But certain companies will have a slightly different variation of what churn means for them compared to a standard meaning of it. So, and same thing with ARPU, same thing with acquisition. Acquisition less so, because it's pretty straightforward. It's number of customers that are coming onto your service, typically from post a trial or some kind of mechanism to get them signed up. And again, ARPU is technically average revenue per user. It could be lifetime value. Different people use different metrics to consider how long a customer is remaining a paying subscriber in terms of an OTT service. So it should be a very simple answer. The truth is, each business tends to have a slightly different variation or a tweak that's relevant for their audience or the way they measure their customers.
Marty?
Yeah, we're finding that we're quickly gaining consensus around some of these things. When we started the company 4 years ago, we definitely were having a lot more of these debates. ARPU, again, as Bhavesh mentioned, average revenue per user, and you're factoring in things like, are they on a particular coupon code right now? And you have to factor in all those revenue events per customer to calculate that out, things like that. On the advertising side of the business, it's much simpler. It's just how much advertising revenue we generated divided by the number of viewers that we had during that time period. So things, that's a pretty simple calculation as it goes. What we would make a distinction on the churn side of things is what's a lost customer versus what's churn. And the lost customer is just because I get to the end of my subscription doesn't mean I necessarily lose access to the service. I could be churning because I might have a billing issue, a credit card issue, things like that. This is involuntary churn. And in this particular case, what's going to happen is the system's going to try for typically up to 2 weeks. Sometimes we see longer, even 3 weeks, where they'll retry those credit cards or retry those banking issues. Well, technically, you're not a lost customer because you haven't lost your right or your entitlement to watch that video until they finally cut you off and you can't watch any more video. That's when you're a lost customer. So even though my subscription was at the end of its month or at the end of the year, there's a little bit of lag that you have to factor into that. Now, in terms of actually then rolling up all that data into a monthly or annual churn number, most people have really adopted and kind of coalesced around the Shopify model. So Shopify introduced this blog a number of years ago where they really came in and looked at a daily snapshot. Used to be you looked at how many you started at the beginning of the month versus what you had at the end of the month, and what was our churn rate. But at this time, you're adding customers every day throughout that month. So it always kind of models it out. Shopify came out with a really nice smoothing algorithm, basically taking daily snapshots and kind of doing a rolling 30-day average. And it really gets to a good place. And it allows us to, once we have that standard definition, to then apply that to all of our customers, introduce some basic benchmarking for our customers to really understand what is monthly churn, and so that they can understand, are they on the right side or wrong side of kind of where other subscription video services are, things like that. So those are the things we see out there. The one thing I would say in terms of translating ARPU, the classic model was ARPU divided by churn was your lifetime value calculation. I think what we have migrated to is using something called survival curves. So it turns out that all of these subscription video businesses, you see a lot of churn months 1, 2, 3, but then they really start to mellow out over time. Right. And so what you can do with survival curves is really look at your retention of your customers by cohort and then calculate out a much more accurate churn rate for any given cohort. So if a group of customers started last week, we can then turn around and go, this is what we expect them, based on the app store they came through, based on the device that they're watching on, based on the pricing plan that they're on, when we expect them to churn out, and how many of those we expect to retain over the first 1,000 days, basically. And it really helps customers then predict what their cash flow is going to be as part of their overall business and what they have to replace just to keep growing the business, which is always the challenge with churn.
Julie, what are the other important metrics for broadcasters and service providers in your experience?
Well, anyway, we have also the customer acquisition cost, which I think is an important one as well, because it's the total cost of acquiring a new customer. So basically, it's the total cost divided by the new customers that you acquired. So you include, for instance, the sales and marketing efforts, of course, but also cost production, programming. So it's a very important one, you know, to track.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yes, engagement, of course, engagement is really key, and especially, you know, on the OTT platform, you know, you want to increase your engagement. So you have different types, you know, measuring the engagement, but it can be also the time spent, you know, on your app, on your OTT service, or it can be also the frequency, how many times you go. Or also the number of videos and number of series you watch on a monthly basis. So you have different types, you know, of engagement KPIs, metrics.
Yeah.
So I would say.
To the audience, I'm conscious that it's about 4:30 almost, and I'm still asking all the questions. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, then please put them in the Q&A section or in the chat section. For now, I'm going to keep asking away because I've got quite a few more over here. One of the things I'm fascinated about, actually, is that I've had many conversations in the industry with broadcasters where really they've been saying, I'm paraphrasing, yeah, but it's the equivalent of, yes, we've got tons of data. I think, Bhavesh, you said that at the beginning. Yeah, the amount of data is not the problem. It's about actually getting actionable insights from that data. Yeah, has anybody actually managed to address that properly yet? I mean, what do you guys do at Singula? Do you do that without going into a full sales pitch, by the way?
Yeah, no, I promise no sales pitch. I think what you're describing is a very common challenge within all types of organizations. We actually call it the air gap. So what we're actually describing is you've got data coming out of different systems all over the place, right? Across your entire journey. We've discussed where data comes from. It comes from pretty much every application that you're using. And then you've got the customer interacting with your service. If you're an OTT service, what you're really trying to do is, whether it's AVOD or SVOD, it doesn't really matter, but fundamentally you're trying to keep your customer engaged as long as possible, right? Whether that be from an advertising point of view or whether that be from a paid subscription point of view. So that customer is going to interact with you through your website, through the app. You may be proactively reaching out to them. There's a whole number of ways, social media and others, that you're engaging with your customer. That's your face that you're portraying and how your customer interacts. The air gap is really the gap in between where my data sits and being able to use that data in real time at the point my customer is interacting with me. Right. And that is one of the hardest things to do, because what people try and do is boil the ocean and try and put all the data in a huge data lake, try and spend years doing algorithms and coming up with content recommendations. But what that effectively does is we've seen it actually grinds to a halt how quickly the business is able to use that data in real time. So, you know, we talked a while back, Kaza, where for those of us who are as old as us, when we remember the BI revolution some 20 years ago, where you had an Oracle DBA and you had the IT department that was the custodian of that data, and how the business would scream and say, I want to get some data, and it will take them 6 months to do something, and then you have a report that comes out. Ironically, the same thing's happening again, because business is not able to use the data quickly enough. And we have horror stories of it's just 6-7 months before we get access to data to use. Now, in an OTT environment, when your customers have been charging you every single month, you can't wait 6 months. Your customers have already gone. So what you're describing is very true. The reality is that gap has to get shortened. And yes, that's how we help our customers. But the way we typically kind of look at it is looking at point solutions to solve particular areas they're trying to solve, because boiling the ocean doesn't help. It's got to do it in chunks to incrementally get better at it. So it's a very well-known well-established problem, and everybody scratches their head and says, yes, that's a problem, but there's no real, because I think a lot of it's not about technology, it's about mindset, it's about approach, it's about how you're going to engage in the business, and the politics of data. That's a big problem as well.
And Marty, you and I talked about this earlier in the week as well, about how there are some, in your experience, there are some organizations that maybe only have, and these are major organizations, we're not talking about tiny little players here. Yeah, there are some organizations that maybe only have a couple of people looking at data, whereas other organizations have hundreds of people looking at it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this data is a little dated, but it's 4 or 5 years ago. We had a friend that was working at Hulu, and he went through the org chart for us as we were starting Wicket Labs, and did a survey, and he found that 18% of their employee base was dedicated to data full-time. Data scientists, data engineers, business analysts. Every decision there was never a decision, it was an idea and a hypothesis that was then tested rigorously with data. And that's the bar. And they felt under-leveraged compared to Netflix. So they were like, oh yeah, I mean, we've only got a few people looking at social media. Netflix has teams of people, so that's the bar that's out there today. And that's the gap that other media organizations need to play with. And I think, Bhavesh touched on this earlier, the right way through this data quagmire of too much data and is you start with the decisions and actions you want to take and work yourself backwards. If you really keep a focus on, lookalike campaigns and Facebook and Google are the best acquisition tool that's in the marketplace today. Okay, so what do I need to get a really great reference set of my current audience and my current customers that I can use for? Well, I need to have their subscriber data to know who's active, and I need to have the revenue data to say probably my most valuable customers make sense. And I want to make sure I blend that with my engagement data to make sure I have active customers that are participating in the service. You combine those 3 data sets and you've got a really good reference set to say, hey, Google, only advertise the people that look like my best audience members, my best customers that are out there today. And it really starts to simplify the data morass that's under that, because any data engineer can then turn around and go, I know exactly how to put that together for you. And so we can then get into a really good cycle of getting better reference sets, getting better campaigns rolling, and it becomes the momentum of the activity itself really makes the data so much more valuable for the businesses. And you can go across the business, and there's lots of those types of decisions or actions that we can start with and then work our way back into these huge piles of data that we have today.
Yeah, and Julie, talking of Netflix, there have been a couple of real world examples over the last couple of weeks where evidently companies must have used data, they must have used analytics to be able to make decisions. So for example, the first one is Netflix going linear in France.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's an interesting example, because Netflix really rely on the recommendation algorithm actually to make a lot of decisions. This is what they are claiming actually. So, and actually they decided in November to launch a linear programming channel. Which I think could be an A/B testing, on their subscriber, the French subscriber, and because for them they consider that it's a way to tackle actually the subscription fatigue, and to give others, suggestion, but just from a linear point of view. So it's another way to actually to test and to serve content. But yeah, stand back.
I don't know how it's going to work exactly, but yeah, I mean, the advantages are it's A/B testing. Presumably it could be AVOD testing, as well. Do we think that Netflix, because Netflix does have this issue that with slowing subscriber growth, other than this year because of the pandemic and everybody being at home, but this is a problem that it used to have last year. And the question has often been that would Netflix try AVOD? Would it become more like a Hulu, Marty, and have a freemium tier?
They've been pretty explicit, just about every public statement saying they're going to stay away from AVOD. On the other side of things, as we talked about ARPU earlier, they seem to have all kinds of pricing elasticity. I can't think of a time where they've raised prices in the last couple of years where they've seen a significant spike in churn. And so if I was them, what they're really looking for, and what every video service should be looking for, is what is just enough engagement to keep you subscribing next week and next month. If you're an ad-based service, same thing. What's just enough engagement to keep you coming back for more and more ads that are out there today? Yeah. What we find is that engagement numbers on linear channels are much higher than VOD channels that are out there today. So it's people are still really into just, hey, well, the next program's on, I just roll into it. And as much as we've for 15 years talked about the death of linear, it just, the data doesn't show it. And so I can understand why Netflix is saying, hey, well, the natural conclusion to our recommendation engine is to just keep the good times rolling and throw the next video up and the next video up and the next video up and make that happen.
And what's interesting, Marty, there, however, is the juxtaposition of using the word linear and engagement. Yeah, because actually linear for me is passive, not engaged. Yeah, I mean, you can turn it on and leave it sitting there for the next 3 hours while you're cooking and eating and whatever else you're doing, playing with the dog, Bhavesh.
Right.
Absolutely.
The other big decision that happened just last week, actually, which I was fascinated about in relation to OTT and analytics, and again, the same thing must have happened. They must have done analysis on this. Is Warner Brothers going PVOD? Next year. I think I read that 17 movies next year that it would have released only in cinemas first in the usual way are now going to be day and date release. So they're going to be released on HBO Max in the States first. Bhavesh, do you know anything about this? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting development, and I actually think it could be seismic depending on how it plays out, because clearly it's driven by the pandemic. It's clearly driven by how do we generate revenue from the movies that we're making, and there's a backlog of them that need to get out. And we certainly in the UK have seen some cinema releases available on Sky and other platforms, and Amazon that are available to you. The interesting thing about this is it's that age-old debate is whether it's the death of the cinema, where people are going to spend money to go to cinema or watch content just streaming from their homes. And if you think about it from a Warner Brothers perspective, the amount of people that need to watch that movie is significantly less than the amount of people that needs to watch in a cinema, because the revenue is different. Their margins are different. I mean, obviously the cinema takes a big chunk of the ticket value when a consumer goes and watches it. Whereas if they're streaming it directly out of their own service, then they're taking a lot more revenue from it. So actually the number of eyeballs is less, and you can get reach much quicker. The question is going to be will cinema turn into that kind of niche service where you're going to watch the blockbuster there because you want to watch in the big screen, which I don't think it will ever get away from. And I'm a big cinema goer, and I'd love to be able to watch some movies in the big screen, but equally I'll be happy to stream movies that are available in cinema today and not go to cinema because they're not ones that I particularly, they're kind of just to keep me going on a Saturday evening type of thing. So I think it's going to be an interesting test. It's going to be an interesting test to see what happens with them. And part of that is it's been driven because of the fact they need to get these movies out there.
We've had a couple of questions through, so I am going to go to those. And the first one is from Caroline Sutcliffe, and she asks, one of our biggest challenges in getting data from multiple sources is what constitutes a view? Wow, really good question, because different people have different thoughts on this. Marty, let's answer that one. Actually, hold on a second. Let me just read the next bit from Caroline as well. Some sources will consider 1 second of view, while others a minute, which can artificially inflate the numbers. In the linear world, there is a widely accepted standard threshold of 3 minutes for programs, not ads. Do you see a standard for digital video anytime soon? And what could that be?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we adopted the MOAT standards, 30 seconds for a program. That allows us to kind of skip by channel flipping and things like that. We discount that stuff. So that really, 30 seconds into any particular video kind of constitutes a view in our particular world. And that seems to play well across the, we're working again, kind of with 2,000 different services. The one thing we think is more interesting is historically, everybody's looked at average duration as understanding, are people engaging with a particular video or not? But when we looked at the data, so going back to our earlier conversation on Google Analytics, what we should be doing is triggering on, our play and stop events, but also every 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of completion of that particular video, we can send that data back. Average duration, though, tends to be kind of a mix. It's a bimodal distribution curve. Some people watch the video a little bit, some people watch it a lot. And so, or some people bail out right away, and only a few people actually make it towards the end of the video. And nobody completes 100% because we watch these credits, so you have to embrace that reality. We created a metric where it's like a net promoter score. We take the percent of people that completed more than 75% of a video, and we subtract the number of people that completed less than 10% of a video. And you get this score from -100 to 100. We call it the attention index. And it works really well for kind of cutting through that odd distribution curve that happens around video consumption that happens today. Because averages, as we all know, can often be misleading when the data doesn't, follow a standard distribution. And so something to be aware of. But yeah, that 30-second block is pretty well accepted in the digital space today. Obviously, for ads, it's different, but yeah.
I think I read Facebook, albeit that this is about 5 or 6 years old now, this metric, but I think it was 5 seconds they counted as a view. Julie, do you have any experience of not just Facebook, but
no, the experience, for instance, at ViacomCBS, we were adopting the 30-second, definitely.
Now, to that point though, Facebook has much shorter clip content, right?
Video,
I mean, if you're Facebook, if you're Snap, if you're Instagram, 5 seconds, you definitely want to say, yeah, they engage with that. But if the content's only 25 seconds long, you're not even going to make that 30-second threshold. So it makes sense specifically.
And Caroline, I do have the number from Netflix. Sorry, I'm looking over here because this is via the screen. Caroline, I do have that number from Netflix as well, but I will dig it out for you and get it back to you because I did ask that question explicitly to them, but it was a little while back. Greg has a question. Another question here. What are the different types of analytics dashboards used by different teams in an OTT organization? And what sort of KPIs are each of them interested in? Bhavesh?
Yeah, I mean, so from our experience, we tend to work with subscription services where you've got acquisition teams, retention teams, and customer service teams. So they tend to be dashboards related to those headline numbers around the number of customers that are signing up versus win backs, that kind of stuff. When we're looking at customer service, we're also exploring the number of issues that a customer's having at any point in time, and trying to correlate any kind of challenges with things like buffering and so forth, that then leads to an increase in communications to the customer, right? So whether that be through a contact center or social media or whatever communication method you want to look at. So I think what we tend to find is the dashboards, while at the high level, which is my KPI is ARPU growth and acquisition. Below that, depending on the type of role you have, there's some nuances around the detail that you're looking at. From a marketing point of view, it's things like marketing effectiveness, campaign effectiveness, click-throughs, all that kind of stuff. But it mainly has to be tied in to the overall number. What is it that we're looking at?
Yeah. The chap at Virgin who used to do our dashboards did a brilliant job. They were very colourful and very useful as well. We had a note, by the way, from Daniel Dighton, who said that Netflix is now 2 minutes, the duration. Yeah, Netflix is 2 minutes now. Thank